got a chance to see Reagan with Dennis Quaid and Penelope Ann Miller. Let's talk about it right now. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thank you so much for spending time with me as we rant about movies, comic books, and television shows, as well as the occasional board game. My name is Frank Zanka. I am your host. I'm an award-winning screenwriter, novelist, and comic book writer, as well as a filmmaker, and getting back to work on a reality show. So happy to finally be getting back on set. But remember to give me that like, give me that thumbs up if you can, and if you like what you see here, please consider subscribing. I am trying to grow the channel out, so ringing that bell does great things for me. I also am a board game designer, and I hooked up with the artist that does a lot of Marvel and DC covers, and his name is Mark Spears, and we're doing a card game based on the classic monsters where you're playing as the monsters. It's lots of fun and easy to learn. And we're going to be launching that in October for Thanksgiving, and you can check out the link in the description below, and that will take you there to Kickstarter. I think we just about hit 400 people today that have signed up for a notification for when we launch in October, so go ahead and join that. Again, it's that Kickstarter link down there. All right, so let's jump into Reagan. I am a child of the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s. And yes, I did see Star Wars in the theater. All of them, actually. So, yeah, that is my time period. I graduated high school in the 80s, 87 to be exact. And so this was all of this time period that is in this film I could relate to because I was there. I mean, I wasn't there, standing next to anybody that was in the movie. But I was there watching the news, seeing all of this unfold. And I did not know a lot of what I saw tonight. I did not know the background of Reagan outside of him being an actor. So I learned quite a bit tonight, and I think it followed a book called The Crusader. I think that it had to follow most of history because the family was also involved in it, and I can't see them allowing any really big deviation. I do agree that it kind of, like most biopics, will take a certain point in someone's life and just kind of expound on it. Where this was, here's him as a kid, here's him as, as an actor, here's him, talking about communism, here's him as the president, here's him, trying to be a president, all that stuff. Here's him being shot, which I do remember that information coming across. We didn't have cell phones, of course, back then. So we had radios and, of course, televisions, and that was it. So there was no social media that you can get information on. Of course, nowadays, you can't trust the news anyway. When Trump got shot, the last thing we heard was that he fell. So, it's amazing. But, back in the day, we really did trust the news outlets a lot more than we do today. They were a lot less biased. Everything, because everybody went to school for reporting and being journalists. And it was, a very high acumen to be a journalist. So everything, for the most part, was non-biased. They were reporting the facts only, which that's not the case now. Now we have certain outlets that fall on this side, and we find certain outlets that fall on the other side, and you really can't trust anything. That's why I watch the internet. At least there are people on the internet that are not paid sponsors of one side or the other. I remember all this stuff being reported, and the Berlin Wall falling. I lived through all of that. Was there going to be a nuclear war? The Cold War with Russia was very intense at that time, and I think there was even more tension then than there is now. And I would definitely say that there are tensions with Russia that are heating up at this point. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens, with Russia after this. But the cast did a very good job. This was directed by Sean McNamara. He does a lot of low budget stuff. He did, The King's Daughter with Pierce Brosnan and things to that effect. This movie only cost $25 million. So this was not a high budget film. They did a lot with a little. I wouldn't say at $25 million is a little, as long as somebody actually knows how to use it. For those that don't, like Disney could never have made this movie, ever. But yeah, so this guy knows how to do stuff on a budget. I know that they did a lot of stuff in studio. When you're shooting in a stage, right, and you have a window that looks outside. I've done this many times, where you're creating an environment and then there's an exterior environment. Like when I worked for Showtime specifically, we had a lot of stuff that had balconies or porches or whatever. Especially on the L Word, where we had houses that had windows, and then you have to have this matte painting or whatever else outside that makes it look like a street or whatever else out in the distance, which is normally, out of focus. But here, and you're going to know what I'm saying once you see the film, when you're looking in the Oval Office, you're looking outside, and a lot of it is blown out. Like they overlit the exterior. I don't know if they did that to hide things or whatever, but you can definitely tell that they blew it out for whatever reason as far as lighting was concerned. It was kind of a little distracting. But anyway, so that's the director side, and then they brought in the writer from Space Cowboys. So those are the two pieces that came together to make this film, and because I didn't see any of the actors that were producers, so they were definitely brought in after. But Dennis Quaid did an amazing job, and I would even say Penelope Ann Miller did a better job as Nancy Reagan than he did as Ronald Reagan. And I didn't know that he was married before. I thought Nancy was his first wife, so that was news to me. But anything that happened in the 60s and earlier, I didn't know anything about. So he, of course, was an actor, and he had he always with actresses, apparently. So he had an actress wife named Jane Wyman, who he grew apart from. She became more and more famous, and he became less and less famous to the point where she, just didn't want him anymore. But at that time, while they were separating, he met Nancy, because also, I didn't know this, Reagan was the vice president and later the president of SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild. And that's where he came really in contact with communism, to the point where he made it his goal in life to destroy communism. Really amazing. I didn't know anything about that either. So, he ended up doing a favor for Nancy, and then they ended up having a relationship that extended all the way to his death. So he was with her forever. And even back in the day, they always had a very, very tight bond. And this movie really develops that bond, I would say. So they did a really good job with that. So this movie does play a little bit more like a documentary than a biopic. Because again, it's not really cinematic where they followed a piece of his life and they really delved into it. It was just pieces, parts. So if that bothers you, then you're not going to like the film. If you prefer watching all of the elements kind of go into and progress to the point where he's president and beyond, then you will like it. and I did like seeing all those pieces build up. But again, a lot of people aren't going to like it, where it basically extends from 1914 all the way into the 2000s. So they tell like basically 80 years of story. But at one time, the communists, include Russia, was trying to push into America, and they were doing this by trying to control Hollywood. They were trying to get all the unions together so that they can control all the unions, and if that happened, then they would be able to control all the working force, which is very smart, because obviously they are the working class party, so if they control the working class, then the government can just swoop in, and that would be the end of that. So it was very interesting. But anyway, he ended up fighting, literally physically fighting, with the head of that communist union. And it was pretty interesting. To the point where it doesn't exist today. I don't think it existed shortly thereafter. But anyway, so we got to see that. I also did not realize that he lost his primary, election. So he originally ran, and he lost the primary, and I think against Ford, and then Gerald Ford ended up going on to become president. So then he ran again, and he ended up winning, and then we had the whole Iran-Contra thing going on, which that was a mess back in the day. I remember that too, where he was possibly going to get impeached. He wanted to get the people out of, our hostages out of Iran, and he was basically willing to do anything to do that, but Congress was not with him, so he had to basically backdoor it. But anyway, he was one of the few presidents that said, "Hey, look, I screwed up. You can blame me if you want." And then it all kind of disappeared. He basically apologized. Whether he had to know about it, but I don't know if he was the one pulling all the strings. He probably just said, "You guys go off and do it. I don't want nothing." And that was the extent of that. Also, John Voight in this film was amazing. And because this film is told from the point of view of the Russians. And I thought that was very, very interesting. So we got to see because again, this is all about communism and the destruction of communism over the two terms of Reagan. That's really the basis of the film, is the communism destruction. And instead of them coming into America, he ends up fighting them on their side, basically pushing them out of everything, because they were taking over Cuba at the time and everything to that effect. And even though, the Cuban missile crisis, where even Kennedy was involved in that. So it was a constant progression from the 60s all the way into the Cold War of the 80s. But the progression of the people that were ruling, because Robert Davi, who is not Russian, looked amazing as, I forgot what character he was playing, but he looked amazing as one of the Russian leaders. And and also the de-aging that they did here looked a lot better than anything they ever did in Indiana Jones, for a lot less money. So I don't know. I think it was just some touch-ups on the faces, because remember, they had to be a lot younger, like when Penelope Ann Miller and Dennis Quaid, who are probably in their 70s now, had to look like they were in at least their 30s. So I think they did a really good job with that. They just did, like I said, just did touch-ups instead of doing full CGI, which would not have worked. And even with John Voight, where they put some kind of a beard on him and they colored it, it was obvious that it was colored. But I think it worked to a degree, because we see him in his 80s later on, where he's kind of walking a little hunchback and stuff like that. And the basis of the voiceover for that, or the storytelling, is that after the Berlin Wall went down, after Gorbachev, he and Gorbachev were at odds with one another, but on the same page where they wanted to de-escalate nuclear weapons. That was their whole thing, and they both agreed on that. But Gorbachev, for some reason, was pressuring Reagan to discontinue the Star Wars program, and not the Star Wars on my shirt, the Star Wars program that was supposed to basically put a shield around the United States for missile attack. And it really didn't put a physically shield around it, but if a missile was coming in, it would hit a counter missile that would destroy that in the air, so there was no fallout. That was the whole basis for the Star Wars system. And for some reason, Gorbachev wanted that dismantled. Reagan walked away from the table and said no. And because it's very suspect that we're going to de-escalate, we have a defensive system, and you want that dismantled, that just leaves us vulnerable to you, launching whatever you have. And I guess it was because they didn't want them to have a defensive thing and them de-escalate. I guess I can see Gorbachev's stuff, because I'll fire at you, you destroy my missiles, you fire at me, I have nothing, now all your missiles are hitting me. So I guess I can kind of see it now, what he was doing. Unless he said, yes, I want that technology too, and then we would both have the ability of destroying each other's nuclear weapons, and it would be useless. But he came out and basically said, a nuclear war, nobody would win, and we should never fight it. So I thought that was very interesting, and I think that's being even quoted today. But it was pretty exciting, and especially when I'm seeing some of the I heard some of the speeches that are probably word for word for what really happened that day, and they were very effective speeches that did not attack his opponents as far as, when he was running for president. There was never attacks. He kept talking about, hope and what we were going to do, and, the working class and all these things. And I found that, pretty amazing. And you can see a lot of, if you go see the movie, you're going to see a lot of parallels to what's going on today. The assassination attempt, the whole thing with Russia going on. There's just a few things that are, parallel to what's happening right now, and it's very, very interesting. And also there was the whole they had, wasn't Vietnam, was it I forgot what they were protesting, but the colleges were protesting at that time as well, and during his administration. So we have the whole thing with, the Gaza thing today. He called it a National Guard, though. He's like, no, we're not going to let the students control us. We can't let them decide what laws they are going to follow and what they're not. So I'm calling it the National Guard, which was pretty interesting because one of the guys there from Berkeley ended up he was like a hippie. I don't know how many hippies there were in the 80s, but I guess I didn't grow up in California. I guess they were still there in California. But he camped out in his yard, and years later, that's when he was governor. So when he was governor, that's right, I forgot that he was governor. So it probably was like Vietnam at the time, because that was like the 70s, 69, 70s, which is the year I was born, 69. So that's probably what they were. They were probably, protesting the Vietnam War. The guy camped out in his yard, and then years later when he was president, he ended up hiring the guy as his speechwriter, which is very interesting too. There's a lot of really good pieces I really liked here. I didn't find it boring, but some people might, because I was very into it, seeing all these little pieces and how this was all going to come about. And I didn't realize he had Alzheimer's either, that he died with Alzheimer's. Very interesting. And she outlived him by 10 years. Pretty crazy. Anyway, I've gone too long on this already, but thank you guys so much for watching. I recommend the film if you are a fan of history. If you're not, then you might find this boring. I like the Rotten Tomatoes score right now is like 27% for critics, but 97% for audience score. So there's a huge gap. The critics absolutely hated the film, but the audience is absolutely loving it. Again, it's probably hitting an audience that was looking for this kind of film anyway. But I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I liked it. I thought the actors did a good job. I do realize that the story is all over the place, and you may not like it for that. I do realize, too, that people might find it boring. There's a lot of things that is going to be very, very subjective here. And again, so they only had 25 million to work with. It didn't look like a huge blockbuster film. It just didn't. It did look like it was sparing on its budget, for sure. All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Remember, too, to give me that like, give me that thumbs up if you can. And if you can subscribe, please do. Ring that bell, ding, ding. And also remember to look at the link below for the Kickstarter link for Mythlords, the classic Monsters card game, where you could play as the classic monsters. It only takes about 10 minutes to learn. It's not very long to learn. I was teaching it continuously at one of the cons. And, yeah, you're buying additional monsters. You're putting weapons and vehicles on them, etc. You're fighting over, like, the Mummy's Tomb and other locations. It's pretty fun. Anyway, and the artwork you're just going to love as well if you're into that kind of thing. All right, well, anyway, check out the link in the description below for Kickstarter, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Check out some of my other videos as well, and thanks again for watching. All right.